Welcome to this installment in our series of 4 conversations with archaeologist Jeremy L. Nino. This series is sponsored by the Metro Area Historical Society Collaborative and focuses on archaeological work undertaken in 3 of the collaborative's Minnesota counties, Dakota, Ramsey, and Scott. This work was conducted by Principal Investigator Nino along with his firm, Nino Cultural Consultants. My name is Barry Madore. I had the honor of hosting these conversations with Jeremy. Our first conversation was an overview of the project as a whole. The other 3 focus on the work accomplished in each specific county. Our conversations were held virtually with only our voices being recorded. So what you'll be watching is not so much a video of us talking, but more of a presentation. While we talk, you'll see photos, maps, and documents highlighting both the archaeological work itself and the historical research Nino completed during the project, which began in 2019 and wrapped up in the spring of 2020. Before we begin, you should know that this project was funded in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with a Heritage Partnership Program grant administered by the Minnesota Historical Society and awarded to the Dakota County Historical Society in partnership with the Metro Area Historical Society Collaborative. Enjoy the presentation. I'm sitting here with Jeremy Nino of Nino Cultural Consultants. Today's conversation, we're going to be talking about the work specifically done within Ramsey County, which we previewed a bit in the previous conversation. We're going to go a little bit more in depth today. And as Jeremy just let me know, the Ramsey County Historical Society magazine spring 2020 issue has an article that covers some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So you should take a look for that. So Jeremy, we laid out a little bit of an overview of what you've done with the collaborative. Why don't we talk about Ramsey County specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. Although the overall project in its 3rd iteration was primarily focused towards alpha sites, completing archaeological work nearby known sites or sites that had been previously recorded but nothing had been done about them yet, those are called alpha sites. Each county had a slightly different take on the project. So in Ramsey County, there were 2 areas that we were very interested in doing additional archaeology at. Both of them had archaeology done in the past and also had the potential for more archaeology to be done nearby them. So they weren't on alpha sites, they were actually on known sites, but we were helping to tidy up some areas that archaeology hadn't been completed in yet and learn a little bit more about how the past played out and worked in those areas. Specifically in Ramsey County, the 2 places that we were looking at were the Gibbs Farm and the Fish Creek Nature Preserve. Gibbs Farm already has an archaeological site number because archaeologists have actually been going out there for a number of different years. It's site 21RA26. Let me talk a little bit about site numbers and how those site numbers get done. Every site that's a recorded known archaeological site in the state of Minnesota has a trinomial system. So the first 2 numbers are 21. They're always 21. That's Minnesota's magical number within the nationwide archaeology numbering system. So 21 means Minnesota. RA is the county, so Ramsey County. And 26 was the 26th archaeological site in Ramsey County that was recorded with the Office of the State Archaeologist. And this initial work was actually started to get done in the 1990s.
For this site?
Yeah, for this site. So we started recording archaeological sites in the 1960s, but they started doing archaeology at the Gibbs Farm back in 1995. So in the first 30-some years of recording sites, there were only 26 sites in Ramsey County that had been recorded up to that point. So the other day when we were talking in the first presentation, a lot of the near counties within the metro area don't have a lot of archaeological sites in them. And Ramsey County is a great example. It's a small county that was already heavily developed by the time archaeologists started getting organized and doing a lot of their work in the 1960s after the National Historic Preservation Act was passed. So we don't have a lot of archaeological sites in Ramsey County, which is one of the reasons why we keep doing archaeology work here. It's sort of the opposite for as you get farther out of the metro area, we start to see more and more archaeological sites because there's been more and more development that's been happening since the 1960s, right. And that's triggering a lot of archaeological work for us. Let me talk a little bit about the Gibbs family. The Gibbs family purchased the land originally in 1849 for their farmstead. They purchased 150 acres. They actually bought a warrant for land from a gentleman who was a veteran of the Mexican-American War. As payment, being a veteran, he was given a script for 150 acres that he could purchase, and he eventually sold that through a series of people to the Gibbs family, and they came out and used it to purchase land in the newly organized, I mean, we're talking brand new 1849 territory of Minnesota. They had just done a series of treaties with Native peoples to gain access to the land. And then the United States government came out and did early GLO, Government Land Office, surveys in 1849. And then right in that same year, the Gibbs family purchased their property. They had to go out and immediately be on it and be active. And so they built a dugout sod house. They basically dug a big square into the ground and then put a roof over top of that made of sod. And they lived in that for 5 years.
Oh, wow.
It's just a tiny little house, and they lived in that for 5 years. And then in 1854, they built a log cabin, a one-room log cabin with one room upstairs, and they lived in that for 13 years.
Oh, wow.
Until their first child was 2 years old, and they're like, "This is crazy. We can't keep living like this. We have to get out of here." So they started adding to their log cabin, and it basically, the house expanded and engulfed that earlier log cabin. And if you go to the Gibbs Farm today, you can actually see where that original log cabin actually sits inside of the house, and today represents a room within it. And then in 1867, they expanded, and then ultimately in 1873, they added another addition to the house. So the 1873 property as it stands today with that farmhouse is significantly different from the 1849 soddy dugout that was there. And that dugout is the very first place where archaeology gets done out at the site. So there's been a series of archaeological investigations, 5 of them that have been completed out at 21 RA 26. The first one was done by the University of Minnesota way back in 1995. I was only 2 years into my archaeological work at UW-La Crosse when this was being done, so I didn't have anything to do with it back then. But the University of Minnesota investigated the soddy, and they actually dug down to where it had been. You could still see the depression at the time. They dug that out. They found the beams for the laying of the floor. They found lots of artifacts related to it. The dugout had fires during the time, and they had to go and buy new stovepipes and things. And so there's all these great oral traditions and stories from the family that were collected over the years. The last people who lived in the house until the 1940s ultimately gave it to the University of Minnesota, and then it wound its way to the Ramsey County Historical Society. Today, the property has not only the Gibbs Farm itself, but also has a schoolhouse on it. It's got some barns on it. It's got a welcome center, and there is an adjoining, more recent house that's there, a brick house that I think is planning on being demolished, and they're going to be building a much larger multi-use historical venue that's going to be there. And that was one of the reasons why we were doing this additional archaeology for this project. So originally 1995 was the first work. And then 2 years later, the Institute for Minnesota Archaeology, or IMA, which used to be a very well-known nonprofit that worked here in the Twin Cities and throughout Minnesota, they came out and did some additional archaeology work on the gardens and things associated with the property. The Gibbs family themselves were considered to be sort of near city suburban gardeners. They would do garden market. That was their primary means of earning money for their farm, and they were pretty good at it too. And they did that all the way up until the 1940s, and then land encroachment was happening and developing, and that was the end of that process. But in 1998, there was additional archaeology. In 1999, there was additional archaeology, and then relatively recently, in 2010, Blondo Consulting came out and did some additional work right around the immediate farmhouse itself and over by where the modern house sits that today is used as some offices for Ramsey County Historical Society and the Gibbs Farm. So there had been a whole series of archaeological digs that had been done. I will say that as one of the things I was able to do as an earlier part of this project from previous years was scan the Gibbs Farm property. So nowadays, since kids who are just getting out of school now they weren't able to go to the Gibbs Farm this spring because of COVID-19, you can take a virtual tour of the Gibbs farmhouse, and I'm sure we'll create a link here that they'll magically pop up as part of this video, and you can go take a tour of it and a tour of the schoolhouse. There's lots of great links. There's built-in fun little stories and things, and the Gibbs Farm people have been organizing virtual scavenger hunts to go look for objects and things that are there. So certainly check that out.
Can you remind us geographically where we're talking about?
So we're talking just north of the University of Minnesota St. Paul campus, up on the border between Falcon Heights and the University of Minnesota St. Paul. Larpenteur Avenue is the main east-west avenue, and then going north-south, it's Cleveland Avenue. So it's the intersection of Cleveland and Larpenteur. It's over by the state fairgrounds, and it's a little island of farm fields surrounded by properties and whatnot. But then there's the big university campus, the St. Paul campus, and then these fields and the golf course. It's pretty. Yeah, so our work there, we were doing two things. One, we were definitely going out to complete additional archaeological survey in areas that were going to be developed as part of additional future work, find out what had been happening in the past in those property areas. But something that had never been done before for this property, and similarly for Fish Creek, is even though there had been all these different archaeological surveys that had been done in the past, no one had ever consolidated that all into one report. No one ever put them all on the same map or GIS in, or create a database that has all these things together on it. So our purpose was really twofold. One, to do some archaeology as part of this Alpha Sites project, which worked out really well. And the second one was to really consolidate and summarize all of this work so that the people at Ramsey County could use this as a planning document for whatever future development they were going to use. So it was kind of a twofer in that sense. That's been one of the most successful things in all of these projects across the metro area and as part of the Metro Area Historical Society Collaborative is almost always, yes, they have an initial purpose that gets done, but there are all these little tie-ins that happen to give extra added benefits, whether it's bringing in a new interest in a small historical society to get involved with doing archaeology, or it's looping in landowners ahead of development that's going to happen, or it's creating a new data set, whether it's artifacts or archaeology that no one's ever been able to do before. So no one's ever taken the time to summarize all these previous archaeological sites into one place. So we did it as part of this project. So our work was really comprised of two transects of shovel tests that were immediately behind the Gibbs Farm house if you were going off to the north and west of the historic property right before you come to the encroaching golf course, and immediately behind the modern property office house that's there. There used to be a pool in that area by aerial photographs that we saw. So we excavated in a wooded area that's over there with a series of shovel tests, and we found about 200 artifacts. And almost all those artifacts were modern in origin, except for a couple that dated quite nicely from the 1930s and 40s, medicine bottles and other pieces of everyday life that were found. We did a full curation and cataloging of all the diagnostic materials and some of the more interesting, and I know you're going to laugh at this. So we find 198 artifacts as part of this project, right? And we come up with just a small handful, 6 of them to be specific, that were determined to be diagnostic, that were curated for long-term storage at Ramsey County Historical Society. So those 6 objects, and one of them is a brown glass 1-ounce medicine bottle. That's very traditional of the kinds of things that people, when they think about archaeology, they're like, oh, yes, they found a medicine bottle. Really cool. What do you know about that? Oh, we know it's from Whitehall, Tatum and Company's Glassworks of Millville, New Jersey. It was from 1924 to 1938. We know everything we can about this. It's fantastic. And everybody's like, yes, bottles. We know, we love bottles. We also found 2, wait for it, ring pull tab fragments. Very exciting. Everyone's like, what? Yeah, we found these ring pull tabs.
Well, we used to step on the beach all the time.
That's right. So they're actually aluminum pop tabs, are developed in the late 1950s by a guy named E.C. Fraze. And today, and it becomes the dominant way to open up cans. And today, everyone knows exactly what to do with a pop top, and everyone doesn't even give it a second thought. But they have changed, just like when we were talking about before, stylistic changes that happen with projectile points for Native Americans, and they go from really large points to small points, and the types of raw materials changes, and as the technology of what you're doing with that projectile point changes from an atlatl to an arrowhead, it's the exact same thing with pull tabs. They start out looking very one way, and today they look very different. And you might say, well, who cares? Right? Why do you guys care about pull tabs that are from the 1970s? Like that nobody cares about that. Well, having been born in 1974 and getting into my mid 40s, the time continues to move forward, and another 40 or 50 years from now, in my own lifetime, when these things are 100 years old, we're going to think of them in the same sexy way that we think about medicine bottles. So there'll be an archaeologist 40 years from now, 50 years from now saying, we found these pop tops from 1970. Can you believe it? Here they are. Now, there'll be a lot more of them on the landscape, but this is of such interest to archaeologists. Not only are we obsessed with things in the far past, but some of us are really obsessed about things in the relatively modern recent times. And there is a movement right now amongst historical archaeologists, those of us that study things in the relatively modern or recent past, to actually catalog and create a huge database of just pull tabs. And because pull tabs are highly diagnostic, they stylistically change over time. Oftentimes they have specific coloring or size or shape differentials from different companies, and you can date a layer of soil pretty fast with a pull tab. We did that exact thing. As a little aside, I was out doing some work at Fort Snelling, and as part of that work, we were shovel testing a whole series of locations, and we found that there was a soil that looked very different from the rest of the soils. And later on, we were told by somebody, oh, yes, that soil was brought in, 15 years ago. They put in all this modern fill. It's very recent. Don't worry about it. And as part of our shovel testing, we found a Mountain Dew can with Mountain Dew pull tab on top of it. And we were able to specifically figure out when exactly that soil got put in to within a couple of months.
Oh, wow.
They threw that can away and it ended up in that fill and got the date on the bottom. And because of the very quick ceration, the fast time frame, the disposable nature of these things, we were able to figure out, we know exactly when that fill was brought in. And then we were able to use the dates from that artifact to go back to the records and find exactly when they brought in that soil, and they overlapped perfectly. So archaeologists in the future are going to be very excited about the pull tabs that I happen to have saved in 2020 as part of a project. So this is cutting edge stuff. So we did find basically that the area had been a residential family area, a lawn area from all of the 20th century all up until today. And we didn't find anything really super interesting which would preclude them from being able to build their new development.
Okay.
We're happy that the archaeology has essentially cleared this area so that Ramsey County can go forward and hopefully put together a good proposal to put in a new development there, and archaeology cleared the way for that. So not only did our project help with that project, but we also were able to summarize together all of the different archaeology that happened. And now it's all in one concise document. The site form has been updated for it at the state, so any archaeologist that comes out there and looks at it knows exactly where everyone in the past has dug versus having to go at each of those individual reports, which sometimes reports get lost or they don't get reported and kept. And so we did that work for them. So that was one of the projects. The other project that was in a sort of similar bent was the Fish Creek Archaeological Preserve area. Fish Creek extends through southern Maplewood, and the area is owned by both the city of Maplewood as well as Ramsey County, and it's managed by Ramsey County Parks and Rec. And the area initially was going to be developed as a housing development back in 2005. So a series of developers under the very original name of Carver Crossings of Maplewood were going to be developing a housing development that went from Carver Lake along Fish Creek on these little bluff tops overlooking the creek as it winds its way down to the Mississippi River. So they were going to do this, put on this parcel. It was a 70-acre parcel that was slated for housing development. So they hired an archaeologist to go out there and look for archaeological resources ahead of the development project, which is very common, and that's the business that I'm in, helping developers and historical societies and others know more about the past. So sometimes you're required to do this because you're getting a permit to do work, or you're doing a federal undertaking and you're working for a county or a city. But regardless of the reason for doing it, archaeologists went out from Summit Environmental Solutions in 2005, conducted standard Phase 1 archaeological survey over the 70 acres, and they found two distinct archaeological sites. One of those just happened to have just one small piece of lithic debris on it, and it's a flake from making or resharpening a stone tool. And the other one, which was located right on the northern edge of Fish Creek, which has cut itself, it has incised itself over time. So it's actually in a really deep cut. And periodically that over the years has flooded dramatically, so much so that the city and county radically altered the exact creek area itself and channelized it and put it into piping and things. Historically it wasn't like that, but because of modern flooding, they've had a lot of issues. But thousands of years leading up to that, it had incised itself down into a pretty deep, steep valley. So we were just outside that valley. And in 2005, the other archaeologists found a small, basically woodland campsite that's about 500 to 1,500 years old. They had a handful of artifacts that they found, just a couple of pieces of lithic debris and 12 pieces of ceramics. All the lithics were kind of water-worn, and they weren't very sure if they were naturally made or if they were cultural. But the ceramics, the pieces of broken pots that are just made from taking local clays and putting in grit temper into it and then firing it to make a vessel, kind of like what you did when you were in maybe a grade school and you made that ashtray for your parents back in the day. They're doing the exact same techniques. People have been making ceramic pots in Minnesota for 2,000 years. There were 12 pieces of broken ceramic from that, so they found 18 artifacts total, and they said, okay, there's a small archaeological site. It's right on the edge of the boundary area. We don't think it's going to impact your development. We think that the site could be interesting, and maybe you should go back and do some additional work. It could be potentially eligible to the National Register of Historic Places because it goes deeper below the plow zone of the fields that used to be in the area. So think about that. And the developers, I'm sure, were taking that into consideration. But unfortunately, the development went bankrupt and they never completed the project. So when that happened, the county and the city ended up buying the property area and turning it into this park preserve along Fish Creek. And nothing happened for the next 10 years. But then in 2015, as the first round of the Metro Area Historical Site Collaborative, this area was investigated again, and this archaeological site, which is 21RA54, is the name of that archaeological site. So let's just do a little bit of perspective things for a second. So in 1995, when the archaeological site was recorded at Gibbs Farm, that was 21RA26. So we fast forward to 2005, 10 years later, and this site is 21RA54. So less than 20 archaeological sites had been identified in the 10 years, 10 years between those two dates. We can actually learn a lot about the history of archaeology in your community just by the pace at which archaeological sites are being recorded. It tells you that there's not a lot of archaeology work that's happening in a place like Ramsey County in the past, and this is a great reason in and of itself to do more archaeology work. I've definitely had some great years in previous projects, like in 2015, doing this work where I think we found almost 10 sites just in 1 year.
Oh, wow.
Doing work in northern Ramsey County around Lake Vadnais. But as part of this project, we worked with the Maplewood Area Historical Society, and we worked with the mayor of Maplewood actually came out at the time. We had a nice, great public development project where we had about a dozen people that came out. We did additional shovel tests right where their previous work had been done in 2005 to expand the boundaries because they were basically right on the property edge for where the development was going to happen. There's a little bit more natural area before the slopes of the creek were naturally formed there. So we got right up to the edge of the slope and we expanded the site boundaries. So we found more of this archaeological woodland campsite. And then we put in some test units, 3 foot by 3 foot square excavations, and slowly dug down an inch at a time, an inch at a time, an inch at a time. It was extreme. I remember it was very hot. I should look back in the records. It was March of 2015, and it was really hot for March. Like super hot. We had a big awning overhead, and we had the camera crews were out there. I was talking to the camera crew. The mayor was there doing some nice photographs and things with me. And over my shoulder, someone yells, "I found a baby's arm!" And everybody, I just like freeze. What? A baby's arm?
The moment.
I'm immediately thinking, okay, it's time to call the sheriff. We got to get the forensic experts out here. And he comes up out of the unit. And he brings it over, and it's a little doll's arm, little baby doll's arm.
Relief.
Yeah, that could have been bad. So, we found 68 artifacts as part of our work. 15 of them were for the historic period. One of them was a baby's arm. This is the 2015. In 2015, yes, we found 68 artifacts. 15 of them were historic in nature, but the remaining artifacts. Almost 40 of them were more ceramics from the same time period the other one's been found, and 13 additional lithics that were definitely cultural versus natural. We dramatically increased the number of archaeological pieces of material, and we were able to narrow down that time frame for when that site was to the late woodland, to about 500 years ago. So we learned quite a bit more about this site.
Can you
Yes, go ahead.
remind us of the definition, maybe the etymology of lithic?
Sure. Lithic just means stone. This is stone chipping debris from the production of stone tools.
Okay.
That's one of those problems. Archaeologists, we just throw in all these terms and we're like, what are you talking about? So back in 2015, we found this site and we noticed that this landform type, which is this high bluff that's directly over the cut for Fish Creek, that along Fish Creek, as it starts over at Carver Lake and then goes down in a southwestern pattern towards where it dumps out just south of Pig's Eye, the Pig's Eye location or Grand Marais location in the Mississippi River Valley, which, by the way, thousands of years ago before that, 2,000 years before probably when our site was around, there was a burial that was placed there, a mound group. There's one solitary mound that's at the mouth of where Fish Creek, basically where 1061 is right now. And unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore. It was demolished during construction. And when the first archaeologists in the 1800s were actually documenting mound groups in Minnesota, they noted that people had already dug into this mound and exposed the human remains, and they were actually looting and looking for objects, unfortunately, with that one mound group. So people have been using Fish Creek for thousands of years as an off-ramp to get up out of the Mississippi River Valley and get to the hinterland areas where the lakes and things are, like Carver Lake. So you can basically use the natural cut for Fish Creek and go up that cut and get up on top of the bluffs.
Okay.
So it's an off-ramp off of the interstate that was the Mississippi River at the time. The rivers crisscross through our state were the highway system of Native peoples in the past. So we noticed that there were a whole series of these similar landforms all along, beginning at Carver Lake and then going down southwest towards the mouth of it at the Mississippi. We had the idea to try to get access to several of these landforms and see, okay, if there's an archaeological site on this one, maybe there are archaeological sites on the other ones. Some of the landforms were in people's backyards. So I did a lot of door knocking and writing letters to people, writing a form letter to them, figuring out who the property owners were and giving them a call and saying, hey, I know this is strange, but I'd like to dig some holes in your backyard. There might be Native American things there. By the way, everyone on this entire part of the project, and really for all the work in Dakota County and the work in Scott County, every time we approached the landowner, and this is oftentimes in the past, archaeologists will say, I had a really hard time getting a hold of the landowner, or I asked to go on the property and they wouldn't let us go on the property, and it just sucks. We couldn't go out and do this work. Every person we asked for this project said yes. Almost every one of them was an enthusiastic yes. Sometimes they were like, tell me more about this. Like, what are you going to do? What do you hope to find? But after explaining to them for just a couple of minutes, people would resoundingly say yes. And then they would even say, come look at this thing I found in the backyard. And they'd bring it out. Or they'd say, I found this really cool, amazing rock when I was on vacation in Mexico. Come take a look at this. And I'd say, great, it's from Mexico. Fantastic. Good for you. One guy had a giant fossil. And he's like, well, you're an archaeologist. Tell me more about this fossil. And I said, it's really old. And it's made out of rock. And I said, I don't know anything about fossils. That's called paleontology. It's a whole number field. Archaeologists, we don't look for gold normally, and we don't dig for dinosaurs. That's kind of the two rules of archaeology right there. Most common misconceptions there. But anybody, not just archaeologists, can tell you about fossils.
So let's get back to what the archaeologists talk about.
Yeah. So we selected 3 different locations. Some of them were on private land, some of them were on public land. We worked with the Ramsey County Parks and Rec Department, who very nice, Kenneth Pelto over there, was very enthusiastic about us going out and doing public archaeology, helped us advertise. Ahead of each of these programs that we did a public talk in the community, and people would be very interested, and they'd like, how can I find out more? And so we had Facebook pages and things about it. And I will say that Bob Jensen from the Maplewood Area Historical Society was the president at the time. He was also a really good volunteer, and to this day continues to volunteer and do work with me in the Fish Creek area all the time. So we went out and we did a whole series of days of digs on these other properties looking for more archaeological sites, and unfortunately, we didn't find any.
Hmm.
And what that tells us is that people essentially would use the off ramp and they'd get to a certain point as they just come up the valley and they get to the first spot, and that was the spot they'd like to set up to camp. So it might have taken them quite a bit of time to finally got to this portage point. You take the off ramp finally up on top, and you're like, okay, let's set up camp right here. And then they would push on after that. They go all the way to Carver Lake or to wherever else they were going. We didn't find a whole other series of campsites. It's very likely that people came back and they realized that this was a good camping spot and used it time after time after time.
Just reused it. Yeah.
Because we find those archaeological sites in that very first spot, and then after that, we don't find any other ones. It could be that we just didn't look in the right places. There are two sides to the creek. We were looking on the south side. Maybe it was on the north side. We can certainly go back and do some more archaeological work in the future. So that was in the fall, this last fall. Over the wintertime, we got access to a small local collection of materials from the Lido family, who used to live right at the source of where the Fish Creek comes immediately right out of Carver Lake. And as kids, these two sisters and a brother, or two brothers and a sister, these three kids, they would find things in their garden, and then they'd be showed to them by their parents, and they'd say, oh, there's the Native American site there. They found a series of arrowheads and pieces of lithic debris, stone chipping debris from tools. All of them seem to date from the same time period, the early to middle woodland, so they're all about 2,000 years old. They're all similar raw materials, so it seems to be one concise collection. It's not a lot of stuff that's hodgepodge together that they could have found at going to antique stores or on vacation or whatnot. So the story makes a lot of sense. So we documented this collection over the winter, and we then got additional information from Ramsey County Parks and Rec and from one landowner whose land we had to walk across to get to where we did this work. We did another 20 shovel tests during COVID, and I've got a nice shot here, a picture here of us all standing in front of the cars with our masks on and everything. We did a lot of archaeology is great for social distancing to begin with. We spread out, we're in fields.
It's called archaeological distancing.
Yeah, it's normal. So you usually work in small teams of two people. One person's digging, one person's screening. You can be 4, 5, 6 feet apart when you're doing that. They don't touch each other's equipment. Everybody was wearing gloves anyway and whatnot. So we followed all the good CDC guidelines to do this work. We put in 20 shovel tests, and we found nothing else. So in all the work that we did for Fish Creek, we did not find any additional archaeological sites, but we were also able to create a data set that includes now all of the archaeology work that's been done along Fish Creek, from that mound group that's way down at the very mouth of the creek all the way up to the lake itself, where any of the known archaeological sites within 2 miles fall on maps. And again, this is a data set that the Ramsey County Parks and Rec can use when they start to put in trails and develop the park itself. Because once areas are cleared of archaeology, then you can put a nice trail on top of it. You don't feel bad about it. We can avoid the place where 21 RA 54 is at. Maybe we pull up an interpretive sign or something and say there's 2,000 years ago, people came and camped right in this spot when they were coming up out of the Mississippi River and walked by exactly the same place that you walk by today.
Mm-hmm.
So that all that information comes together and is really helpful to be used. So both these projects were summative and added and pulled together additional information. Yeah, that's the project.
Excellent. So you've hinted a little bit. Are there specific ideas about what to do next in Ramsey County?
Well, I don't think we need to do any additional work at Gibbs Farm. The immediate core itself has been heavily developed by the putting into the intersection for Larpenteur and Cleveland. So we wouldn't do our archaeology right in the ditches or anything like that. Doesn't make any sense. And plus, it's a great place for utilities. People love to put utility corridors there as well. So we don't want to dig up buried utilities. That's a bad idea. But so there is a little bit of property at the Gibbs Farm right where there, if you've ever been there before, there's a series of pens for the animals and things near the corner of Larpenteur and Cleveland that no archaeologists have ever looked at. And then also there's a paved over parking area in the very northeast corner of the site that no one's looked at archaeologically either because it's underneath pavement. So we could go back and investigate those, but I really think that our work there is done. Fish Creek, there's still acres and acres and acres of prime spots that we could go back to. Bob just emailed me this last week and said, let's go back to Fish Creek. Let's go back and look for some more sites. Now that we've started to create a good relationship with local landowners right around Carver Lake, it would be really interesting on the shores of Carver Lake that have been relatively undeveloped yet. There is a nice county park that's right over there with a swimming area and everything. I pretty sure that's been heavily impacted already. But some people's properties go right up to the lake edge. They've been mowed and things. They've been a little bit of landscaping that's been done, but they probably haven't modified that landscape too much. That would be a great place to go back and look. And then we can continue to sort of widen our gaze and look down into the area of Pig's Eye down in the Mississippi corridor as well. One of these days, I know I'm going to get permission, or someone's going to come to me and say, we really want to look for Pig's Eye. We want to look for the earliest St. Paul, setup spots. There's a large flat island area down there, which Native Americans call Grand Marais, and we call Pike, the Pig's Eye area. And I would love to do archaeology down in those areas. Well, it's an old residential area that used to be there for a long time, and now it's just sort of industrial scrub brushland area,
Right.
and that would be really exciting to do. And I'm always interested in doing more work around the smaller sets of lakes, like Lake Gervais or Vadnais Lake or Snail Lake. I've done archaeology work around those. We've found lots of woodland sites from out the last 2,000 years along those. I know if we continue to look at other lakes going steadily north in Ramsey County as development continues to push forward and then push out of the county and go to Forest Lake and places like that, that I know we're going to continue to find sites. So I would love to do that work ahead of development, and that may be something that the Ramsey County Historical Society decides to do with its next round. But I think they're pretty preoccupied right now with what's going on with COVID and how to reform a lot of their work. But I know they're going to be really excited and gearing up for this new project out at the Gibbs Farm to build a new development out there.
Thanks, Jeremy. I think that just about wraps things up.
My pleasure. Look forward to doing some more of these.
See you next time.
All right. Take care.
And thank you all for joining us for this conversation with Jeremy L. Nino about the archaeological work Nino Cultural Consultants did in partnership with the Metro Area Historical Society Collaborative. You can find the video presentations of our conversations covering the archaeological work done in each of the Collaborative's 3 counties, and one focusing on the overall project, on the websites for each historical society. We hope you take a chance to view them all and participate the next time there's a public archaeology project in your area.